One. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Liam Mullins from the Seven Stars, and on behalf of Media for All, I'd like to welcome you all to this week's MEFA Matters. Now, Media for All was founded in 2018 by Naren Patel, and is made up of BAME role models in the advertising industry. Our focus is really about how we can recruit, retain, and help individuals from BAME communities to rise within their organisations and within the wider industry. And this platform is one of the ways we're trying to help. We really believe that part of our role is bringing conversation and education to the table, which is why this webinar was born. It's about giving people a forum to ask difficult questions or awkward questions and help ensure that everyone has language and vocab to be able to have the right conversations. So today's topic is all about how we hold leaders to account. How do we keep our promises when it comes to the anti-racism action? And whilst a load of organisations and actually more than 550 people signed up and have made a positive step to publicly sign up to the Adlan Commit, we also know that this conversation debate's been going on for years and years and years, and we really need to make sure that action is happening now. So we want to bring people together around this chat today to talk about what they're doing in their organisations and what leaders they're doing to help make sure that we're keeping their promises and bring that about with change and action. So today we've got a guest in the form of Dan Clay from OMG. He's one of the signatories. We've also got Me for Role Models, whose organisation have signed it or they've signed it themselves. And also we're joined by a couple of people who work for smaller organisations to give their perspective too, how we make sure this isn't just another one of those water cooler moments where it's loud and noisy now and then it disappears and we're talking about something else in 3 months' time. That simply won't do. So my job's about trying to contain all of this into a 30-minute webinar. And as we're going through, we implore you, and you always do, please ask questions. Just pop your question in the Q&A. You can either do that anonymously. Absolutely, there's no problem with that. If you just want to ask something that's tough to ask, you can do that as is, or put your name and we'll endeavour to call you out. So I'm going to introduce our panel today. So we've mentioned we've got the lovely Nish with a brilliant record collection behind her. Nish is the marketing director for Google. We've got Moses. Give us a wave, Moses. Moses works at GroupM as Senior Optimisations Manager. We've got Lauren, who is the board director and head of response for PhD. Lauren's background is computing and was in Pure Play Digital before joining the agency there. We've got the godfather himself, Naren Patel. He's the founding father of the outdoor industry, I believe, and also founder of Media for All. We have Elizabeth, who's co-founder at 16:9 Media Agency. And last but definitely not least, we've got fellow Liverpool supporter Dan Clays, who's the CEO of Omnicom Media Group, and he's been leading the charge in OMG's response to BLM and what his agencies are doing and what actions they're taking. So Dan, I'm going to start with you this morning. What can you tell us as, as a leader, massive media agency group, what are you doing to hold your agencies accountable in this area? And, you've signed the open letter, there's a load of actions and there's timelines in there. What are you doing around it and what practical actions have Omnicom taken so far?
Thanks, Liam, and thanks for inviting me on. I think it's a brilliant session that you're hosting. The first thing is it helps having a leadership team that are fully on board, that agree that we have to accelerate progress, that can see that we haven't done enough yet, and it's the focus is that action and accountability. So I'm fortunate that I've got a team of people around me that are very supportive of the need to really drive change. In terms of holding the agencies to account, and I would hold myself in that as well as being held to account, I think the key thing is, and it's possibly slightly obvious, but we have to reset the KPIs and the targets. This is a business critical issue, and we need to work towards it as we would a business critical matter. So you need KPIs, and then effectively you can work back your strategy around that. So that's a big deal for us. So, KPIs around how we're going to significantly increase diverse representation across OMG, but also within each of the agencies. And this has got to be sustained change. So targets through 2023 to 2025, monitored quarterly, like you would any financial KPIs. These need to be overall targets, but percentage improvement targets. We've got to look at overall ethnic representation, but also specific groups within that. We've got to look at it by level, because obviously senior representation is critical, and retention of talent as well is something that needs to be better monitored. So getting the KPIs in place is essential, and that's got to be visible and accessible to all of our staff. I mean, Nishma and Google have done a really great job with the way they publish their diversity report. It's really user friendly. You can see the data. I think that's really important. So I think having the targets is key. But at the same time, we also know that like command and control is not necessarily the only answer, and so we have to engage the whole business in it. So there's a bunch that I can talk about on the webinar that we've done, from, you know, getting the right structure in place, so the right team and organisation. This is not the job of 4 or 5 champions in your business. This is about having a structure of teams and organisational model that can drive change. So we've set up a steering group that includes all of the agency CEOs, the chairs of our advisory groups, including Lauren, who's on this session. We set up OMG Multicultural. So having that organisational structure is important, with senior people taking personal responsibility. And there's other stuff I'm sure we'll cover off, like, you know, the importance of active learning. So we've set up OMG Safe Spaces, which is it's effectively a platform that enables people to anonymously call out any racism they feel, anything they want changed, and then these CEOs will reference everything that comes through that in their all hands. So it's about active listening and recognising the privilege that we've got in our roles to drive change. Education is critical. We're reviewing our approach to recruitment in terms of the partners we use, getting rid of referral schemes where people just recruit the same people back into their business. You know, you just kind of adding to the effect of just creating a homogenous environment. So we have to change that. So there's a whole load of stuff. We effectively put a 6-point plan together, and we're pretty committed on a bi-weekly basis to check in against how we're doing against that.
Thanks, Dan. And, you know, everyone I've spoken to in this area, you know, can't talk highly enough about some of the immediate stuff that OMG have put into place. So I guess thank you from all of us for taking it so seriously. And just hearing you talk, it's clear that it's about being led by the top. It's about the CEOs taking responsibility, but it's also about that engagement. Nish, I guess when we think about Google and what you're doing, what are you seeing similarities there? Are you know, what's really helped you, you know, get this higher up the agenda?
So very similar to a lot of the stuff that Dan was talking about. We've always kind of led with data, although I would challenge, actually, one of the biggest problems has been not having enough of the data. You know, it's easy to kind of say, oh, we've got the data, and you hide behind it. But, you know, you need the granularity of data, as Dan said, whether it's by levels, whether it's understanding the retention or attrition that we've got in terms of particularly also not lumping them into BAME, but thinking actually quite specifically, not job done because we've got BAME, because actually we have a significant problem in terms of a lack of representation from people from Black communities. So I think it's been around actually taking some of the good work that's been there and challenging it, because the hardest thing is, and perhaps, you know, we've been, and I'm going to be very honest about the journey we've been on here, is that we've talked about this being top of the agenda, and it has been. There is absolutely no one, I doubt, from Sundar at the top of Google in terms of our global CEO, all the way through to the leadership team here, and one that I'm part of. But that we haven't moved forward enough. So there becomes a disconnect, saying actually, even when people sign up, even when leaders sign up and you have some of the data, it's still not enough. And actually what we're doing now is to look at and saying, well, how do we make sure that's enough? So the longer term targets are essential, because that shows a continued commitment, and as you say, monitored quarterly. But it is going in deeper to say, recruitment is only one of these solutions. The reality is we're not going to recruit enough people to have a meaningful difference to our numbers, not in the short term. On the long term, yeah. And the reality is we need to get some runs on the board now, because people have lost faith and belief in the reality that we can either change and want to change. So it's a mixture of two. You've got a long-term strategy, build on what we've done, and then a more one that says, actually, the stuff that is uncomfortable and you've got to go deeper on it, saying, how do you get some runs on the board? What's the things we can meaningfully change? And I think the thing that we have focused on, particularly beyond the recruitment and the targets and the numbers, is the experience is not the same. So if you are BAME or of any other kind of marginal, but let's focus on BAME in terms of kind of race and ethnicity, our data, when we look at our survey of our staff, suggests that they're not having the same experience as their white colleagues. And for us, that's a key indicator. So when we think about creating an inclusive culture, we've got to understand why. What is it that they're experiencing that's different? Now, some of this is around a sense of belonging, being able to have safe spaces to speak up. Do they feel that they're not being treated fairly in terms of progression and development? So I think, this is the tough place where you get to. And also make it universal, right? Because the key thing is it has to be every single member of staff has to feel like they are part of the solution. It has to be responsibility from the leadership, of course, and being accountable, and they will be very visibly held accountable. We've had to challenge on things like investment, if I'm honest. We haven't invested enough. This was a bit of someone's job rather than actually throwing the kind of investment we would if it was another initiative. And then I think the other key area is saying we can make meaningful change for the people who work at Google and for those that we continue to recruit and do. But we also have to take recognition that we have an impact that goes far beyond Google. And it says, how can we be a lot more bolder in terms of what we do there? Google is notorious, we are quite cautious. We have to be. We know that our actions can have considerable impact positively and negatively, and so we have to be really considered about that. However, being considered is one thing, being overly cautious is another. And I think you'll continue to see some more significant shifts in what we're going to do going forward. So whether that's through the marketing, whether it's through our agencies and partners who we will hold to account even more so and more aggressively so, or whether it's through actually what can we do to genuinely invest into structural change. So rather than it being just investment and donations, actually where's the structural change that we can bring through YouTube, through Google, through training and education and small businesses. And I think we've had these things, but have we really gone behind them as hard as we could have done, with a real focus that says, we're going to put a target to say we're going to help X number of Black businesses or X number of kids who aren't getting the opportunity they should have done, or filmmakers or writers who simply aren't kind of penetrating into the worlds they should do. So it's two sides. What can we do within Google and what do we do outside? But the most important thing is visibility of that, of what we're going to do, and the accountability, investment, and the clarity of a plan that is held up really at the start of every meeting.
Thanks, Nish. And I think, your point about the numbers and the visibility of the data is absolutely critical. And Moses, last week you were our numbers guy and you pulled some rabbits out of their proverbial hat. In terms of GroupM and how you guys down there are kind of attacking this issue and how you're moving it forward, what would you say is kind of the big wins that you've already had, or how are you keeping it moving?
So I guess similar to what Dan and Nish have already said, there's a lot of initiatives that have been brought under the holistic WPP umbrella, which is announced by Mark Reed, where there's already a UK inclusion board active in the UK that is trying to make consistent approaches across all the WPP agencies. So, for example, after the initial aftermath of the protests, there were WPP safe rooms, which were open panels of discussions that allowed people to find ways or talk about ways that they could better support Black communities. The call for change open letter that was done, the WPP have announced that they're going to take action against all 12 points. So things like setting targets, things like tracking progression of underrepresented groups, and comprehensive review of policy and processes so that they can elevate Black talent. And then also just commitments to additional programs, inclusion programs, and support for anti-racism charities. That's as a wider WPP. But I guess from a more macro GroupM perspective, things like changing the terminology from whitelist and blacklist to inclusion and exclusion, but also integrating with more bodies such as MEFA to be able to create synergy with young and aspiring BME talent with white leadership, and then being able to create infrastructures of maintaining those relationships to be able to onboard that talent. So that's one area that GroupM and WPP as a whole are trying to tackle this issue.
Thank you, Moses. Really appreciate that. Lauren, it's part of our OMG contingent this week, takeover, I think. In terms of what you're doing on the ground at PhD and specifically within that agency, where are you guys at, and how are you making sure it's at the front of every agenda at the moment?
So there's a lot of similarity, obviously, to what Dan said, being the big boss at Omnicom. Some of the key things that I want to pull out, the Safe Space initiative, we want to also look at the structure for how we deal with maybe some of the more concerning or alarming messages that may come through. It's really important for us to know that we are having discussions with people in an anonymous, safe space, but we also want to put structure in place to ensure that whatever comes out of it, we're just not ignoring it. The other element that we're looking at, and Dan can chip in on this one, is pay gap reporting. So we're looking at ethnic pay gap reporting. We're looking at measuring pay, promotion, hiring and retention gaps from a race background, but just generally from an underrepresented background. And Dan's already said we're doing it quarterly. There are actually some other organisations that are doing this really well that we're looking to surface from. So organisations like PwC, who's a PhD client, they've been doing it for a really long time. Some banks as well have been doing it for a long time. So we're looking at how we can surface some learnings from those organisations and infiltrate it into our approach. Some of the other things that I've been discussing with Maritza has been around mentoring and coaching, and I think Moses alluded to something that we're also adopting. So from a mentoring perspective, this happens organically currently. And we're looking at how we can structure it better so that we're doing cross-agency mentoring, because it can be a bit biased if someone from your agency is mentoring you. And we're privileged to be part of a network, so we need to leverage that a bit better. Coaching is a passion of mine, simply because it's not available enough for underrepresented groups. It can be seen as an elitist, area of development, and we're looking at how we can democratize it and make it more available to people from junior backgrounds as well as underrepresented backgrounds, and take that straight into leadership roles as well. Another initiative that I think is quite exciting is looking at sponsoring individuals as well. I think Moses, you mentioned this as well. But Dan and I spoke about this and whether or not it's something that senior people have as a KPI for themselves. So if I sponsor someone who's junior, who's just coming into the industry, should I be held to account if they don't, continue their career, with PhD or at Omnicom, and what are the reasons behind that? So having that, individual accountability is really important. And there's some other areas that we're looking at, and I think Dan's picked up on quite a few of that already.
I love that, Lauren. I love the accountability piece and the fact that, that person is partly and jointly your responsibility too, and therefore you're going to help that person throughout their career. And if they don't get on, there is somebody we can understand why that might be. Yeah. Naren, just coming back to you and similar sort of question, which is, we've talked about this for a long time, right? And right now it's loud and noisy. And Naren, what would you say? How do we keep this, as something that is at the front and center of how we're thinking and what we're doing at the moment? And I guess when you set up MEFA back in 2018, it's probably part of the reason why we're here, right? So what would you say are the things we need to be thinking about now?
Yeah, I think Liam, I think the first thing, and Dan kind of alluded to this is a really difficult business challenge. To go where we are so underrepresented in media to, getting, close to kind of decent representation is a challenge because, fundamentally, it's always around, one, there's not enough talent coming into media, and secondly, we're not very good at retaining it. So even when they come in, they tend to leave. And all the stats that Moses shared last week kind of supports that. I think for me, the thing that's brilliant is, I had a great conversation with Dan Britzen and his team, but I'm having, for the first time, lots of companies, agencies reaching out, asking for help. We've got 50 mentors now, so if any of you are looking for mentors, please get in touch with Media for All. And we're sharing, the knowledge we have, really. So I just think, for me, I think, I love what Dan said is, clients are going to hold agencies accountable in terms of, if you want to get on this pitch, you better have a program that's more than just window dressing. And I hope agencies hold media owners to the same level of accountability, because I think fundamentally, one, you've got to get it into your culture. I think the business leaders need to realize this has to be a cultural change. And then secondly, there has to be, unfortunately, some sort of kind of impact. And I remember when all the recycling thing happened in outdoor, we had to change some of our materials we were using because certain brands just said, you can't use those materials, you know, because it's not recyclable. And I think that has to happen fundamentally for companies to force change, really. So I'm excited. And I think we're going to keep on making sure this is on the agenda.
Thanks, Naren. Just struggling with my mute button there. No, I agree. We are excited, and you know, this is just one way that we are going to, you know, hold up that mirror and help keep it on the table as something to discuss. Because I think the one thing that's undeniable is there is so much positive groundswell of movement from everywhere at the moment. I think we just need to make sure we all as a team help focus it and direct it into the right place. Elizabeth, this finally coming to on what I can't believe is our opening question, but in terms of you know, 16 by 9, what have you started to do? And I know you guys didn't, you know, you didn't sign the industry letter thing, but you guys are doing loads in this space already. So I just wondered your perspective on that.
Yeah, hi. Yes, actually, part of what motivated us to start 16 by 9 was, I guess, the lack of diversity. Certainly at my level, there weren't many of me wandering around, you know, and certainly passionate about that. So we started an agency, I guess, with the opening answer to that. But I think it was Naren that was sort of saying there's been certainly way more dialogue and narrative and reaching out and exposure, which unfortunately as a result of what happened in the States, but and this is good, you know. I come from big broadcasters, so actually I think you are right, Naren, that it'd be good for broadcasters to certainly be made to be part of this overall change of narrative with agencies. And I certainly know how I was in that space before I came over to this side. And it is about being visible. There, I guess, and I've spoken to a couple of smaller media agencies who feel a little bit sort of tied in that they want to do a lot, but they don't have the deep pockets. You know, you've got COVID that's in the mix. You're just about sort of trying to protect your cash flow, for example. But so recruitment is a bit of a challenge. So how do you go about sort of making change that's authentic? And to that, I'd say things like, certainly for us, being visible, mentoring, you know, getting involved in MEFA and the like, Bloom for the ladies, and within Bloom, actually, they've got, as in Bloom UK, they've got a media exchange, which is inviting men, CEO level and above, C-suite, to get involved with the flip side. And hopefully some of those will be from the minority groups, as well as within those smaller companies. Again, you can look at things like whether it's work experience, internship as a smaller company, paid, of course, as much as you can. Those things are incredibly valuable. You look around your space. If you are all the same type, even if there are 10 of you, and you're all the same type, look the same, come from the same bubble, you need to question that. So I guess within, whether it's 3 months, 6 months down the line, when hopefully you are in a place to be able to look at recruitment on whatever level that is, then you would be thinking hopefully of one that is certainly more diverse, because we are certainly not going anywhere to make sure that that message is out there and people are kind of signing up to it.
I love that, Elizabeth. I think there's a whole thing about, if you look around and no matter how many people in your organisation, if you all look the same, whatever you look like, that's not right. And how do we make that more inclusive and more diverse?
Yeah.
Thank you. Dan, I'm going to come back to you. There's been a question here that's come in anonymously, and I guess that the crux of the question is steering groups, D&I headcount, focus groups. All of that sounds great. Is this really about resource and channeling resources, that money, time, effort? What's the best way to start making this really motor?
That's a completely fair question. It's a combination of things. If we don't make it part of people's time, particularly at a senior level, then you effectively end up outsourcing it to people, and you don't take, I said it earlier, personal responsibility. I remember doing 2 or 3 months ago, well, longer than that, pre-COVID, a chat with Nishma for Marketing Society, and the big theme for us was personal responsibility, and it really struck a chord with me that, you know, this is not something that you can just go, right, it's another set of people that are doing this. Everyone somehow has got to take at different levels of their time some degree of input into it. But I do get it. I do get this. I do get the notion that if people have got, you know, a digital department to run and this as well, then, you know, that becomes onerous. So that's why in the advisory groups we're looking at co-chairs, for example, as to split the load on that. And so Lauren will work with a colleague on that. But we need to look at partners as well to accelerate some of the change. So great organisations like Bricks and Finishing School, for example, we could work with from a mentoring perspective, as well as the systems that we put in ourselves. I do think you need some dedicated roles. What we're seeing now is the type of dedicated roles that you have to have in place and the type of skill set to be able to drive change and project manage and facilitate change is important. So it's the type of roles that we bring in. I think organisationally you can be efficient with your time. So start thinking now about October and Black History Month or whatever your longer range stuff is. It becomes even more time consuming when you think about it 3 weeks before and you're suddenly looking for speakers and you've pressed the panic button. So if you have a longer range plan and you put prioritization around what you're focusing on, then that you can be time efficient. And then lastly, we have to look at funding. And we were having a conversation before we went live on this call, and you know what we're doing at the moment is just looking at auxiliary costs as a business, as we've been doing, as you can imagine, like every organisation has over the last 3 months in particular. About how we can divert funds as well. So we have a base level of funding now, but what else can we forego to redirect the funding into this subject? And all of the agency MDs and CEOs and FDs have been very responsive to that. So you can create a fund to help, you know, to move things forward. So I totally get the question, and I've also felt the burden of, you know, the pressure people have been under, particularly over the last month, where as we've all tried to get more education, we're going to the same people asking the same questions, and guess what? They've also got an affiliate network to run, or they've got a TV campaign to manage, and that puts pressure. So we have to be really empathetic around that, and it's balancing people's natural passion for change, but also the fact that, you know, they've got, you know, a career to drive, you know, and I'll spare Lauren's blushes, but you know, we were talking yesterday, and first and foremost, Lauren is an amazing digital practitioner, and I'm, you know, at the same, you know, steering a brilliant ship, and so at the same time being asked to do the multicultural chair at OMG. So we have to balance that and get that prioritization right. But I think, you know, in short, I think it's a combination.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dan. And I guess, you know, we're talking about it, great. Now it feels like more people are thinking about it. And then I guess to your point, then you have to prioritize it. And that could be investing more time up front before you decide what you're doing. That could be investing money. That could be investing, you know, and all of that feels like it's happening in a way that it didn't necessarily happen before. Or it didn't happen to as big an extent before, which I think is the positive movement that we're starting to see. Nish, questions come through, a couple of questions actually, and as part of what we do as MEFA, as you know as well as I do, is about that retain and advise element of, you know, people from BAME communities, how can we help them thrive within our industry? Nish, one of the things you talked about is people from those communities, or, you know, Black people, whoever, they're not having as a great lived experience in some of our organisations as some of our white colleagues. And I wondered, the question really here is, you know, what is it outside of recruitment that we need to be doing to help support people from BAME communities, or that sort of talent to prosper in our industry? Yeah,
and I think so. I think it's very much tied as well. If you think about things like mental health as well, which from our data shows is people from BAME background are more significantly impacted in the workplace than others. I think that comes back to things like belonging and fitting in, and they shouldn't really be thinking about fitting in, but adding to, and not feeling like they have to conform. I think what's really interesting, again, you know, I can see what we have done and I can see what we need to do now, because there's certainly some kind of reflection saying what we did before was not enough. And why we have this process where lots of people are educating themselves, which is great, but I always do temper that with saying, please don't be quite so self-congratulatory of yourself when you're educating yourself on something that people have lived through for a very long time. But what that's done, the education has done, is it opened up conversations in a way that actually is fostering that sense of belonging more than it ever did do. So before, I think there was this kind of impasse that it was quite hard for people to think, well, you did all the kind of fun and frippery about making people fit in, so cultural days, relevant stuff, safe spaces, but it never went far enough. And I think that's where you have to say, actually, the effort the owners has to be not in the BAME community, but on everyone else to kind of create the space, which is actually, I was going to ask the question to Dan, maybe you can answer it in a bit, Dan, is, this is something I've sort of been pushing at Google as well. It's like, why does your multicultural chair have to be Lauren? In actual fact, I would go so far as to say, completely change it. Put everyone who would be considered kind of white privilege or something else, put them in the roles of those chairs. Take it away from the people who are BAME and let them advise and guide. But don't give them the responsibility. Give the responsibility to someone else, because that's what really, I think, you get a step change in understanding, but you also then start to model allyship. And I think allyship, you have to really unpack it and go, what does it really mean? Because it's a lovely word. And people go, well, I think I'm being a good ally. And we've done some work around actually, what does it really mean by creating simple steps? So someone can go, right, I can see how I can do that every day. So I think when we thought about the experience being a comparable experience for everyone at Google, it is that rather than saying that the people who are from a BAME background need to change what they're doing, or we create something specific for them, we want to flip it and say, how do you look at everyone else? What needs to happen and change there to make this an environment that everyone adds to rather than feeling like they're fitting in? And I think that's going to be the biggest change for us. I'll come back and let you know how that's going on, but it's something that will have to happen over time and that we work to. But I think that really is the heart of it. Education's great, but only if people apply what they've learned and talk about what they've learned. And responsibility shouldn't sit with BAME folk, it should sit with others to create the safe space, the conversation and the cultural environment for people to feel like they can do. I also think I love that idea about accountable sponsorship. I'm most definitely stealing that one straight after this call. I think that is brilliant, because sponsorship and mentoring is essential, and it's all on us to put our time and effort into helping everyone. And I think we've had debates in MEFA about this. I think it's really important that our young BAME executives have the opportunity to talk to someone else who's BAME, because there's a shared experience. But there's also a reverse mentoring opportunity that if they could speak to someone who's not, actually they learn about maybe what the hurdles or perceptions that they're trying to fight against, but also they can change perceptions. So I'd love to see a mix and match in mentoring, and I love the idea of accountability on sponsorship. And it's everything. You've got to do all those things to really shift.
I'm going to jump in on a couple of points. Personally, I'm really passionate about diversity and inclusion. Obviously, being Black helps. My background has been really, really weird. So I've grown up in, it was quite challenging growing up. I didn't have parents to support me, so I brought myself up. I went to college, uni, did computer science, here I am today. And I think that for the people who probably had the same sort of path as me, it's so important to have that representation at the top and to see that there's somebody who's actually been able to make it. And it's not been an easy sort of process. It's been difficult, but it's possible. And I think that I've seen lots of different examples from people from different backgrounds look after D&I. And I think that somebody from a BAME background has the permission and the authority to be able to drive greater change, because we own it. This is my story. And I know what you mean about putting the onus on us, but I think that we have to move past, I think Naren said it before, we've got to move past the noise and start to move to actionable change. And if actionable change will come from me saying, and Dan knows this, I'm really open and I talk a lot and I'm not shy with putting my points of view across. We need that type of independence and confidence to be able to get things across. And let's see what happens after a year. If it doesn't work, we'll just move it on to someone else.
Yeah, and I would, and look, I mean, I think it's a fair point Nishma raises, and I agree with Lauren in the answer. I think the composition of that team is also really important, but it just can't, it's got to be representative across the business as well. And mean, the reality is Lauren's also highly effective and easy to work with, so that's also helpful, because it goes back to running any business. Getting that chemistry right in terms of how you can work as a high performing team is really important. So, I think that's another factor. And also, we've said from the outset that whether it's 6 months or to a year, we will rotate people in these roles so that they feel like there is the flexibility that it can change, the team can evolve, and other people can also have the opportunity to help drive change. So, I think we've got it right to start with, and then I think it's going to evolve.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think, again, based on my experience at 7 Stars, it's very much about the group of people that are driving the equality message from our perspective are a very diverse and broad range of people. And actually the people are more passionate. I'm probably more passionate about some of it than I am, right? Which might sound weird, me admitting that, but I think it's the people that want to be in those positions, want to drive that change. I think they're the people we want there. And you're right, if you change it around, and it's all of our responsibility. Moses, I've got a question for you just around, we've heard a lot from Dan and Nish and Lauren about it being around education and training, and what can businesses do, and what are you doing at GroupM to make sure that your leaders and your people who are running teams are making the right decisions, are making the right calls, understand what they need to look for in terms of bringing in the most inclusive teams? What's happening down there?
So GroupM, as I mentioned, they're doing a lot of work in terms of more macro WPP focuses that are putting the mechanisms in place. But I would say in terms of what I think should be done, first and foremost, these need to be business goals, right? So finances and new clients are amazing and they keep the lights on, but so is the fair and treatment and well-being of staff, Black and BME staff included. So that's really important. And then also, they need to be transparent on these things. So I think it's almost like a taboo. Nobody ever wants to talk about it, whereas it very much needs to be an integral part of business reviews on a monthly or quarterly basis, where businesses are talking about, this is where we are, this is where we want to get to, so that it's normalized. And then also in terms of trainings and unconscious bias trainings and whatever, I think a lot of those things are good. I think that the problem is people see it as maybe more of a once a year thing, but you have to see it as a lot of people have 20, 30, 40 plus years lifetime. And in terms of the experience in media, you're not going to change that with half an hour to an hour training on a one-off basis. What you need to be able to do is develop that, use different scenarios, life relevant scenarios, such as what's happened, using numbers, using different experiences to be able to make cases and showcase why the development of BME staff, Black staff, is really, really important. Because at the end of the day, if you don't make it a business goal, and if you're not being transparent about it, then people will always suspect that something dodgy is going on. Whereas if you're carrying the whole business along and you're letting people know the incremental steps, at least people can see what's going to happen. And like Lauren said, we'll see what happens over time, over the next year, over the next couple years. It may just be a flash in the pan, but if you're making it normalized, making it a business goal, talking about it more frequently, it will just be an endless conversation, as opposed to happening whenever there's a central point of, topic.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Moses. Thank you. I think we've had a few questions coming in, and we've probably got 5 minutes left, so we'll probably have a couple more questions and then wrap it up. But a topic that we've had a couple of questions come in, a couple anonymous and also from Darren Rubens, is around traditionally BME communities don't see advertising and definitely don't see media as a an attractive industry to go and work in. And I think what we will do, we're going to base a whole webinar on that subject itself. So we're not ignoring those questions. We're going to have a separate session. We might call on a couple of additional guests to come and play a part of that, because there is a fundamental issue that, if you are working in the advertising industry, you are probably working in you're probably living in central London. If you're going to be able to afford that, you're probably from a middle class white background. If you could, and there's a load of issues around that. And there are some top things that we're doing as an agency, and I know the guys on the panel today are doing, to make the industry easier to get into and easier and better to navigate once you're there. So we will spend another session on that. I'm going to ask a bit of a tricky question. Naren, I'm going to come to you on this, which is, especially last week with all of the Facebook furore, and I'm not going to make my personal opinions clear on that right now, but as media agencies, or in the advertising industry, have we a responsibility about where we spend our money and making sure we're spending it with vendors and media partners that are living up to our ideals and kind of the actions that are laid out in the industry open letter? Naren's left me on a limb on that one. Or you're on mute, Naren?
Yeah, sorry. I was just using that time to think, actually.
Sorry.
I think it's a tough one, Liam, because fundamentally it's not your money. It's the client's money. But I think, whatever it is, 550 organizations have signed this letter. And I think as an industry, we need to have something which, I don't know whether campaign does it or, where they go back to these organizations in 6 months, 12 months, and really applaud the ones that have done something and maybe just nudge the businesses who signed it and have kind of not done anything. And then, whether there's some sort of, I'd love it if we have the equality pay gap, like we've got the gender pay gap. And then I'd hope the agencies would put this information to clients and let the clients decide. I think fundamentally it's their money. But I think everyone talked about transparency, and I think that's what we need. Because I think that can help the clients make the decisions for, on those sort of areas, really.
Cheers, Naren. And I guess, Elizabeth, you mentioned earlier on at the start that one of the reasons why you set up your business is because you looked around and you thought there was a different way. And, to be honest, that's why our agency was born too, maybe for slightly similar, different reasons. But how are you tackling that kind of thought about how you're thinking about your plan, how you're pulling together the strategies, how are you making sure that they are coming from a place of inclusivity and, and a good mirror to the world that we're putting up?
Well, it's certainly something, because we not only strategize, plan and buy, but we also create. And so that sort of helps us really in a way, because when we're looking at who you're targeting, where you're targeting, but also how you're representing the creative, within that. And that does help us. I certainly do bring it up, not for the sake of it, because I don't think that makes sense either, to be honest. It is really more about it making sense. At the end of the day, if you can show a client that there is a benefit to that plan, and that it's the right thing to do, then 9 times out of 10, they get it. It may be uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable question, particularly when I'm bringing it up, because I'm talking about diversity, but I don't think anyone should shy away from it. And if you've got someone who is adamant and sort of strongly opposing it, then I guess it's up to the person to decide whether you want to continue with that client or educate them, but I think 9 times out of 10, if not more, they generally sort of take it on board, and it's woven within our fabric. We present ourselves that way from the beginning. Oh, can you hear us? Yeah, so we present ourselves that from the beginning. When we're going through our deck, we are diverse, we're passionate about it. So I guess if a client has an issue with that, they probably won't go with us. I think we're just not apologetic about it. And that's that. And one thing I would say as well is just to sort of pick up on something a couple of people sort of said. We as a community are agents of our own change too. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud of that. One thing I think that maybe we in Adland should do a bit more as those in those minority groups. Certainly, I'm not a fan of BAME. We should come as a collective as well, a bit more within Adland, as opposed to particular agencies dealing with their bits within their agency, us. Because when you've got other people who have similar stories to you and you think, right, actually, I'm not alone, and that person's experienced it that way and that person experienced it that way, and it's similar, at the very least, it sort of helps the mental well-being. You sort of are supporting each other as a collective while you are aligning with the allies and educating them as well. So I think, we are agents of change ourselves.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And you know, I think it's completely a fantastic point, which is like, you know, the authenticity. If you don't like how we're going to work, don't work with us, all of that sort of thing. And what you're doing down at your agency is fantastic. I also think having, you know, when Naren came up with this brainwave in 2018, having people like me, you know, in those inverted commas, having people that look a bit like me in positions of power and, you know, doing well in the industry, I think is absolutely critical. And, you know, I can remember some of the Media Week Awards sat on the stage looking out and thinking, there's no one like me. It's a bit of a sea of people. So I definitely think there is lots of change to come. Guys, we're out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody. The panelists have all been chatting as we've been going through. And I think everyone knows, as we say every week, we could go on for another couple of hours on this. But I did want to say thanks to all of our panelists. And thanks, Dan, for joining as a guest this week and being really honest and giving us all of that, you know, good stuff that you're doing at OMG. And thank you for that. Again, thank you for everybody who's joined. We've had over 200 registrations again today, which I think is just an indictment of the fact that we're all committed and we're all in this for the long haul. I still know that's not the 550 people that signed a letter. So where are those other 350? Let's push them to register for next week. Please tell your HR team, tell your bosses, tell your mates. Let's see if we can get up to 300 next week. Finally, from me is if you are listening and you want to take action or you want to support, go to our MEFA website. And if you need a mentor, if you want someone to chat to, if you've got any questions, all of our contact details are there. So please hit us up. And, you know, we're really, really happy to be involved. We've got some really interesting initiatives coming down the line, which we're quite excited about, but we'll be announcing shortly. And in the meantime, stay safe, everybody, and see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.